Hi everybody, I hope this video finds you well. In this video we're going to do another example of conditional analysis, similar to the one we did in the previous video where we looked at analyzing the results of an experiment about a new sort of pain reliever and whether or not it worked, and whether or not it worked better than sort of competing drugs that were on the market. So this one will be another sort of example here. This one will be sort of more on the political side of things, and will give us a chance to again sort of work through understanding the data and then also building and using the conditional distribution. So for this example, we're going to suppose you work for a political agency advocating for the legalization of marijuana in New Mexico. To study the current support for this idea, you mail out a survey to voters across the state and ask them how supportive they are of the idea of legalizing marijuana. So then you record their response and also the region they live in. So we've divided New Mexico into sort of three main regions. We said that some of the people, my apologies there, some of the people were in northern New Mexico, some were classified as being in central New Mexico, and some were in southern New Mexico. And then in terms of their feelings about legalizing marijuana, right, we said that some of them felt like they supported, some of them were neutral, and some of them were do not support. And of course, this whole table here is, as we know, what is called a two-way table, because it shows data that has been classified according to two categorical variables, in this case, the region that these voters live in and their level of support. So as we know, before we even begin to look at the questions, we know we want to sort of add in the totals of this. So we can go ahead and begin by getting the row totals. So 40, 19, and 4. Looks like that should have a total of 63 there. Then 46, 56, and 13. That should have a total of 115 right there. And then 15, 4, and 20. Looks like we should have a total of 39 there. We can also get the column totals, 40, 46, and 15. That gives us 101, 19, 56, and 4 gives us 79, and 4, 13, and 20 gives us 37 there. And then, of course, we can add in the sort of table total. We can do 63 plus 115 plus 39. We get 217. If we go the other way, 101 plus 79 plus 37, we have to get the same thing. We get 217. So what this 217, of course, represents is that in our sample overall, there were 217 voters from across New Mexico in which they were divided into these different groups here. All right, so then we've got a number of questions that we're going to do with this. To begin with, we're going to answer some questions like which region was the most frequently showed up according to our sample. We're going to calculate a couple percentages in B, C, and D. The percentage of the sample that came from southern New Mexico and were neutral about legalization, the percentage of voters in our study that supported or were neutral about legalization, and the percentage of voters in your study that supported legalization or were from southern New Mexico. Then in part E, we'll actually go ahead and construct the conditional distribution based on the region. So we'll be treating region as the explanatory variable. Then in F and G, we'll use the conditional distribution to figure out which region had the highest rate of neutral voters and which region had the lowest rate of do not support voters. And then finally, we'll put all this stuff together sort of from an interpretive standpoint and figure out that if your agency was going to create an advertising campaign targeting only one of these regions, so they were only going to run advertisements in northern, central, or southern New Mexico, and they were going to advocate or argue for legalization, right? Which region would you recommend that they advertise and sort of choose? So we'll be doing all of those pieces here. So we'll start with doing the first couple pieces down here, and then we'll probably move on to the next page when we get down to doing the conditional distribution. So let's go ahead and get part A. So part A says which region appeared most frequently according to your sample. So this should be pretty easy, right? We're just trying to figure out which of these three regions showed up the most frequently. We can easily see that it was central New Mexico with 115. So we would say central New Mexico with 115 voters, right? So that's all we need to say. We know that that's the most frequent because it had the highest frequency in terms of voters. That might indicate to us that central New Mexico has like a higher population density than like northern New Mexico or southern New Mexico because we found more voters living there than we did in the other two regions. All right, now we want in B to calculate the percentage who were from Southern NM, and they felt neutral. So we need people who had both the traits of being from southern New Mexico and who also felt neutral. So we can see that the people from southern New Mexico is down here in this bottom row. The people who are neutral were in that sort of middle column. And that means that there were 4 people overall who had both of those traits. So to calculate that as a percentage, we would do 4 out of the 217 overall. Convert that into a percentage, so 4 divided by 217, and you should get 1.8%. So only 1.8% of our entire sample were people from southern New Mexico who said that they were neutral. All right, we want to calculate another percentage who support plus neutral. All right, so let me just go back and make sure we actually use the word that they used there to make sure we keep that in mind. So they said the percentage who support or were neutral. Now, we discussed way back at the beginning of our class that whenever you see that sort of word or, you know that you're going to be adding here. So we just want to take the people who supported and add them to the people who are neutral. So we don't care what region they're from, so we're looking at the sort of column totals here. So we know that there were 101 people who supported and there were 79 who were neutral. So we will do this by taking 101 plus that 79 and then dividing by that 217. If we do that 101 plus 79, that should come out as 180 out of 217. And then we can do 180 divided by 217, and we can see that that was about 82.9%. So 82.9% of our sample were people who either supported legalization or felt neutral about that. Notice we could have also gotten this 180 an alternate way by taking 217, which is the total, and subtracting 37 because we only gave people 3 options: support, neutral, and do not support. So since we were interested in these 2, we could have just used this one and taken it away from the total. But we also can do it through addition. All right, finally, we want the percentage who support or are from southern New Mexico. Well, we know that this is again going to be an addition because it says or here. So we can see that the percentage of people who support was 101 and the people from southern New Mexico were 39. So we should begin by taking that 101 and adding that 39. But we need to be careful here. If you think about where those numbers come from, this 101 comes from adding up these 3 values, whereas this 39 comes from adding up these 3 values. But notice these 3 values and these 3 values have an overlap. They have an overlap of those 15 people who were both from southern New Mexico and supported legalization. And those 15 people were double counted. They were counted once in the 101 here and again in the 39 there. We don't want them to be double counted. We only want them to be single counted. So we need to remove that overlap. We need to subtract those 15 people. Another way to think about this is that if we added them up without using the totals, we would need to add 40, 46, 15, and then 4 and 20. But we wouldn't use that 15 twice. So the fast way to do that is to remove that overlap and then, of course, divide by 217. That is 101 plus 39 minus 15 up top, which looks like 125 out of 217. And then if we write that as a percentage, 125 divided by 217, looks like we should get 57.6%. So what we're saying there is 57.6% of our sample were people who either supported the idea of legalization or happened to be from southern New Mexico. If you want to check, you can confirm that 125 could have been found by simply doing 40 plus 46 plus 15 plus 4 plus 20, finding all of the sort of people from those 2 groups. All right, let's go ahead and move on to the next page to go ahead and calculate the conditional distribution here. So we're going to attempt to just grab this sort of section here so that we can just carry that on to the next page. We'll see how this goes. Oh, my apologies. If we can't get this to sort of work here, we'll just manually rewrite it. Okay, we'll just copy that. Let's go ahead and just pop that onto the next page here. All right, did not quite work. Oh, it only brought over the totals. All right, we'll just go ahead and rewrite the sort of pieces here real quick. My apologies for doing that. Give me just 1 second here. Well, of course, you don't have to give me that second because you guys can just go ahead and, fast forward the video as I sort of go ahead and scramble to make this work here. Still a work in progress, of course. All right, so let's go ahead and do that, right? We'll just sort of rewrite our data here. So we've got northern New Mexico, central New Mexico, and southern New Mexico. And then remember we had support, neutral, and do not support. And we had this sort of data in there. Okay. We had 40, 19, and 4, 46, 56, and 13, 15, 4, and 20. And then we had some totals that we had already done. This guy was 63. This guy was 115. And this guy was 39. And then we also had some column totals. This was 101. This guy was 79, and this guy was 37, and then I believe the overall total here was 217. So let's go ahead and build this conditional distribution. I believe this is actually part E here. All right, yeah, we've already done the other ones, right? So we want to do the conditional based on region. So we're trying to see if the region that these people live in, if the region of New Mexico that they live in somehow impacts or helps explain their opinion on legalization. So what we want to do here is we want to note that region is in the different rows here. So we will do this by dividing by the row totals. So let's go ahead and do that. So we're going to recreate our chart. So there's northern New Mexico, central New Mexico, and southern New Mexico, and then there's support, neutral, and do not support. And when we go to build this nice little table here, what we're going to need to do is divide by those row totals. So when we go to do this first one here, since everything here is in that first row that had a total of 63, we'll be dividing everything by 63. So 40 divided by 63 should give us 63.5%. So what we're saying there is basically 63.5% of people from northern New Mexico supported legalization. 19 divided by 63 shows us that this would be 30.2%. So about 30.2% of northern New Mexicans were neutral, and 4 divided by 63 should give us 6.3%. So only 6.3% of northern New Mexicans did not support the idea. Moving into the second row, we'll be changing our row total to 115. So 46 divided by 115, that would be 40%. Then 56 divided by 115, that should be 48.7%. And then 13 divided by 115 should give us 11.3%. Finally, we'll be moving into our last row. So we'll be using those 39 as our row total. So 15 divided by 39, that would be 38.5%. 4 divided by 39 would give us 10.3%. And finally, 20 divided by 39 would give us 51.3%. So there we go. There's our conditional distribution based on region, or treating region as the explanatory variable. All right, so what can we do with this? Well, the first thing we were asked is which region had the highest rate of neutral. Well, we can look. The neutral rate for northern New Mexico was 30.2%. For central New Mexico, it was 48.7%. And for southern New Mexico, it was 10.3%. So we would say central New Mexico with 48.7%. In other words, we are saying that in central New Mexico, close to 50% of all the voters reported that they were neutral about this legalization. And that was by far the highest rate. That was a higher rate than in northern New Mexico, where it was only 30% of people in that region, where in southern New Mexico, almost no one, only 10% were neutral about this idea. All right, I believe we also wanted to get the which region had the lowest rate of do not support. So we're wondering which region had the lowest rate of do not support. Once again, we can just look in each region. For northern New Mexico, their rate of not supporting was 6.3%. For central New Mexico, it was 11.3%. And for southern New Mexico, it was 51.3%. Since we're looking for the lowest rate, it would be northern New Mexico with that 6.3. So we'd say northern New Mexico with 6.3%. So only 6.3% of people in northern New Mexico say that they do not support this legalization. All right, so the last part is we wanted to sort of use this. So we wanted to pick one region to advocate for legalization. All right, so let's think about the sort of pros and cons of these sort of different regions here, right? So let's first think about sort of northern New Mexico. Northern New Mexico looks like maybe a good place to sort of advertise, right? If you think about it, a lot of people there already support the idea. But even when you say that, a lot of people already support the idea, you might realize that northern New Mexico isn't a great choice. Northern New Mexico is not a great choice because the people there already pretty much support the idea. You don't need to advocate or argue to those people. They are already sort of on the side of legalization. So that's not a great place to go and advertise. What about if we look at something like central New Mexico? Well, central New Mexico has sort of a high proportion of people who support, but they also have a really high proportion of people who are neutral. And people who are neutral might be able to be shifted into supporting if they hear some arguments or see some advertisements. So this high rate of neutrality seems like a good idea for choosing central New Mexico. What about southern New Mexico? Well, southern New Mexico has the lowest, the lowest rate of supporting, so that might indicate that it's a place where we need to do work. But notice that it has a very low rate of neutral and a very high rate of not supporting. That might mean that it's going to be very hard to convince those people to change their mind because they're sort of already firmly entrenched on the do not support side. There's another reason why we might be hesitant about running our advertisement in southern New Mexico. If you look back up at the original data, notice and remember that southern New Mexico by far had the smallest number of voters. So what that's sort of saying is that southern New Mexico might require us to do a lot of work because they are very sort of staunchly against this idea, and there's not that many people there, or at least not according to our data, that even if we do change their minds, we're just not impacting a lot of people. Central New Mexico, on the other hand, we already noted that it has a high level of neutral, who might be the easiest to sway, and it has a really large amount of people. So the more we do there, the sort of more efficient it is. So all of this sort of indicates that central New Mexico is the best choice since it has the highest rate of neutral. And remember, these people should be easier to sway, and central New Mexico was the most frequent, indicating more potential voters. So what this basically tells us is that central New Mexico is a great pick because not only does it have the sort of most sort of easily swayable people, the most highest rate of neutral, but it also just has the most potential voters, at least according to our data. Having 115 in our sample versus 39 and 63, that's not saying there's only 115 voters in all of central New Mexico, but in our sample, apparently there were a lot more people to be found in central New Mexico than versus northern or southern New Mexico. So this gives you guys another example of sort of building the conditional distribution, and then, especially in this part H, sort of actually understanding how you would use that in an actual sort of real life situation. In the next video, we will be wrapping up sort of the conditional analysis section, just talking about sort of some limitations of this analysis. Until then, hope you guys are doing well.